Hey guys, tonight we're strolling into an ancient oasis, one so obscure you might have better luck finding Atlantis than this forgotten gem. Imagine a desert breeze brushing gently across your face, grains of sand tickling your nose as twilight melts the horizon into ribbons of pink and orange. You're standing in the heart of Sogdiana, a once glorious oasis kingdom that even history quietly shuffled aside. And honestly, considering you've probably never heard of these guys, you probably won't survive this journey without falling asleep first. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know down in the comments your current location and what time it is there. Just curious who's exploring the Silk Roads past bedtime. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into an oasis town whose name whispers through ancient texts, Samarkand, heartland of the Sogdians. As twilight settles into a thick velvet dusk, merchants are lighting lamps outside clay brick homes, their glow casting dancing shadows onto the bustling alleys. But don't let the modesty fool you. These dusty lanes were once gateways to unimaginable wealth. Picture narrow streets filled with Persian silks softer than your grandmother's favorite pillowcase, exotic spices that made Roman senators weep into their overly fancy togas, and rare gems that put modern-day rappers' bling collections to shame. Sogdiana was no mere pit stop on the famous Silk Road. It was the Silk Road. At least that's how the Sogdians saw it, quietly confident that the world revolved around their sprawling market squares. Traders gathered here, drinking sweet wines beneath fig trees, their voices humming negotiations in a language almost nobody today can pronounce, let alone understand. But back then, speaking Sogdian meant you held the golden key to economic bliss, an open sesame that could unlock treasure from Chang'an all the way to Constantinople. And speaking of golden keys, here's your quirky fact of the night. Sogdian merchants had a peculiar tradition of burying tiny bronze figurines beneath their homes, supposedly to coax prosperity out of stubborn desert sands. Think of it as their version of a lucky rabbit's foot, just less fluffy and way more archaeological. Historians still argue whether the Sogdians were truly the original architects of the Silk Routes, or simply opportunistic middlemen who lucked into prime real estate. But regardless of their origins, their legacy is unmistakable. Like those overly confident street vendors you meet on vacation, Sogdian merchants believed their hustle was invincible, until, inevitably, it wasn't. Tonight, though, we pause in this quiet evening moment, long before storms gathered over their horizon, to admire the beauty of their unnoticed rise. You watch children playing tag around carts stacked impossibly high with woven carpets, the air thick with the scent of roasting meats and something fragrant, perhaps cinnamon mixed with cloves drifting from a baker's oven. In the distance, musicians strum strings softly, their melodies blending seamlessly with the warm laughter and easy chatter of men counting profits after another successful day. Back then, Samarkand wasn't just a town, it was a vivid tapestry woven by commerce and culture, stitched lovingly by families whose names have long since faded from memory. Silk Road caravans converged here, breathing life into this desert heart, turning it into a cultural kaleidoscope of Persian, Chinese, Turkic, and Indian influences. It was as cosmopolitan as Manhattan, minus the skyscrapers and with infinitely fewer Starbucks, though the local tea houses did a booming business in caffeine long before the Green Mermaid appeared. As darkness settles completely, stars bloom in the indigo sky above. Stargazing wasn't just romantic here, it was practical. Merchants relied heavily on the constellations, believing that the position of stars dictated everything from the ideal trade routes to how persuasive their haggling might be tomorrow. You smile a little, wondering if the Sogdians ever looked at Orion's belt and thought, good day for selling spices. Walking deeper into Samarkand, you find yourself drawn to the flickering light emanating from a gathering. Storytellers here were as revered as merchants, sometimes more. Their tales spun magic from the mundane, weaving adventures about distant lands where dragons guarded silk cocoons and spices sprouted wings to fly directly into traders' caravans. Okay, perhaps the details got exaggerated a little, but a good story often fetched better profits than even the finest Persian rugs. Nearby, an elderly woman gently weaves patterns into fabric with fingers so nimble they blur in candlelight. Watching her is hypnotic. Each stitch seems effortless, but you sense the years behind her artistry. Each thread a metaphor for how Sogdian merchants themselves built their intricate web of trade, delicately, carefully, stitch by stitch, caravan by caravan. Yet tonight isn't about the intricacies of collapse or loss. Tonight you're simply strolling down streets that once echoed with laughter and bartered secrets. These walls, now crumbling, were once painted vibrant shades of indigo and crimson, colors imported from lands most locals never saw. The Sogdians, despite living amid desert sands, colored their lives vibrantly, determined to fill their days with splashes of beauty in defiance of the stark wilderness around them. As your footsteps echo softly against cobbled streets, you consider how easily history forgets even its most vivid scenes. The Sogdians, masters of trade, diplomacy, and storytelling, quietly slipped beneath history's currents. But tonight, before that gentle slip, they stand tall and proud beneath your gaze, illuminated by soft lanterns and warm stars. For now, in this tranquil oasis, their quiet rise is safe, untouched by the tides of oblivion waiting just over tomorrow's dunes. And while you probably won't survive without drifting to sleep first, tonight, let's stay awake just a little longer to honor their quiet, unsung glory. You step away from Samarkand's twinkling lights, following the rhythmic sway of caravan bells deeper into the arid sands. The merchants of Sogdiana didn't just magically sprout from desert dust. They were born of its very hardships. If you've ever complained about sand between your toes at the beach, just imagine being born into a life where sand found its way into literally everything. Your shoes, your food, your dreams. You might call it irritating. They called it home. For the Sogdians, the harshness of the desert wasn't an enemy to fight, but an ally they learned to respect. From childhood, they adapted to blistering days and bone-chilling nights. Sandstorms were as common as rainy days in London, except way grittier and far less charming. Yet, it was precisely these brutal conditions that crafted their resilience and ingenuity, molding them into master traders who thrived where others barely survived. The desert's unpredictability taught them flexibility. Caravan masters developed an almost supernatural sense for changes in the wind, the subtle shifts of dunes, and hidden sources of water. Finding water out here was more than essential. It was the equivalent of striking gold. You might laugh now at overpriced bottled water from your local grocery store, but back then, fresh water was quite literally liquid wealth. Wells, hidden deep beneath shifting sands, were fiercely protected secrets passed down within families like treasured recipes. Lose your camel or a bundle of silk? Annoying, yes. Lose your map to a water source? Well, historians still argue whether anyone unlucky enough to make that mistake ever made it home, Now picture yourself trudging alongside a camel caravan. Sand crunches beneath your feet, your throat is parched, and you're mildly regretting your life choices. Meanwhile, your Sogdian guide strolls calmly beside you, unbothered, even humming a cheerful tune, probably about how much profit he's going to make at journey's end. These camels aren't your run-of-the-mill zoo attraction either. They're hardy beasts, stubborn yet dependable, specially bred by generations of Sogdian camel handlers. Think of them as the vintage pickup trucks of their day, not flashy, not speedy, but reliable and oddly charming. And speaking of camels, here's tonight's quirky nugget. Some Sogdian caravans used specially woven camel socks made from durable wool to protect their animals' feet from scorching sands. Picture a caravan of camels trotting stylishly in hand-knit booties. It's the kind of thing modern social media would absolutely adore. Who knows? Maybe hashtag camel socks would have trended had the internet existed 1,000 years ago. The unforgiving desert also shaped the merchant's character. Patience and diplomacy were paramount skills. You learned quickly that losing your temper over delayed supplies or uncooperative camels accomplished nothing besides amusing your fellow merchants. Sogdians developed a calm, almost zen-like demeanor, their patience honed sharper than any blade they carried. After all, screaming at the sand never made a caravan move faster. And besides, nobody likes a cranky merchant at the negotiating table, except maybe their competitors. Living in a place as hostile as this desert meant relying deeply on each other. Communities were tightly knit out of sheer necessity, relationships built on trust deeper than the sands they traversed. Families intermarried strategically, forging alliances and business partnerships more enduring than many royal treaties. Friendships formed in desert caravans often lasted lifetimes, bound by shared hardships and whispered dreams beneath starry skies. This desert was also where the Sogdians first learned the value of careful record-keeping, because no matter how great your memory might be, even the best traders forget things when heat exhaustion sets in. Clay tablets, scraps of parchment, anything at hand became vital to recording transactions. The meticulous records Sogdians kept turned out to be so reliable that even Chinese emperors and Persian kings preferred their contracts in the tidy, concise Sogdian script. But perhaps the most essential desert survival lesson was humility. Nature out here was the ultimate equalizer. Rich merchants and humble caravan workers alike bowed to its whims. You might have a fortune in silks and spices loaded onto your camels, but one sandstorm or dry well could turn your luxurious caravan into just another mirage fading in the shimmering heat. It kept merchants grounded, cautious, always aware that their fortunes were tied directly to the goodwill or occasional indifference of the sands. Tonight, beneath the endless starry canopy, you sense that quiet humility and determination. Caravan leaders gently guide camels into circles for the night, their movements fluid and practiced. Lanterns flicker softly as traders gather around fires, sharing tea so sugary it'd put modern energy drinks to shame. They laugh quietly, swapping stories and news from distant cities, their voices mingling with crackling flames. Listening carefully, you catch snippets of faraway kingdoms and exotic markets, rumors that shimmer like heat waves on the horizon. Traders speak of rising kingdoms in the east, tension among Persian rulers, and gossip from the great Roman Empire. Some factual, most embellished just enough to keep listeners intrigued. Sogdian merchants were masters of storytelling after all, understanding that every good deal starts with a captivating tale. Yet despite their skills, or perhaps because of them, they never underestimated the desert's power. With quiet reverence, caravan masters sprinkle offerings onto the sand, bits of grain, pieces of dried fruit, whispered prayers. They honor the spirits they believe inhabit the dunes, thanking them in advance for safe passage tomorrow. Whether you believe in desert spirits or not, it's hard to deny the sense of solemn respect in their rituals. As sleep tugs gently at your eyelids, you realize just how deeply these merchants were shaped by their harsh yet beloved desert home. The sands taught them patience, humility, resourcefulness, lessons they carried far beyond the dunes. Soon, caravans would journey into bustling cities and distant empires. But tonight, beneath the endless desert sky, you rest among merchants whose quiet strength came straight from the sand beneath their feet. And let's be honest, if you manage to survive tonight's stroll without nodding off into dreams of camel socks, you deserve an honorary Sogdian badge. You're now drifting into the heart of the Silk Road, stepping inside bustling caravan cities that were so vibrant they'd make Times Square look sleepy. Imagine marketplaces alive with the scent of cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, and saffron, spices so fragrant your sinuses are doing a happy little dance. Lantern-lit stalls overflow with shimmering silks dyed in deep indigos and radiant golds, brighter than your phone screen at 2 a.m. You maneuver carefully through crowds thicker than tourists in Venice, past merchants shouting prices and deals in a cacophony of languages. The caravan cities of the Silk Road were far more than mere rest stops. Think of them as ancient world shopping malls, complete with food courts serving dishes you've never heard of and entertainment that could rival Vegas, minus the flashing neon signs. These were hubs of trade, culture, and gossip, where ideas traveled as freely as spices, and foreign merchants exchanged news about far-flung places. Rome's markets might have been legendary, but here in Oasis, cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar, trade was life itself, so vital it literally shaped the layout of entire towns. Every Sogdian city revolved around its marketplace or bazaar. Picture a sprawling maze of tents and stalls, permanent buildings and temporary structures, all arranged chaotically yet somehow sensibly. Merchants positioned themselves strategically. Jewelers near cloth sellers, spice dealers next to those offering perfumes. Because let's face it, even ancient traders understood basic consumer psychology. Ever notice how your supermarket puts candy bars right by the checkout? Same principle, fewer calories. But these bazaars weren't just for commerce. They were the cultural heartbeat of Silk Road life. You pass by entertainers performing acrobatics, musicians plucking melodies on stringed instruments you've never seen, poets reciting verses to appreciative crowds. Storytelling was big here, not just for leisure, but as a subtle form of marketing. After all, which silk scarf would you prefer? One quietly folded on a shelf, or one with a fantastical tale of dragons and distant mountains woven around it? Exactly. Your quirky tidbit of the evening. Merchants sometimes employed poets and storytellers to invent captivating legends about their goods, boosting their desirability. Just imagine someone today trying to sell sneakers with a tale involving mystical journeys and hidden powers. Oh wait, marketing teams already do exactly that. Amid all this activity, one intriguing historical fact emerges. The caravan cities were among the most diverse communities in ancient history. Here, you'd hear Sogdian mingling with Chinese dialects, Persian, Turkish, Greek, even snippets of Latin from adventurous Roman traders who made it this far east. It was the original melting pot, centuries before anyone used that term. Cultures collided here, giving rise to art, philosophy, and cuisine blends that were both deliciously strange and beautifully innovative. As you wander deeper into the bustling streets, you notice how skillfully Sogdians navigated cultural diversity. Unlike some merchants who stuck to their own enclaves, the Sogdians eagerly adapted, learned languages fluently, adopted fashions, and seamlessly blended into various societies. Historians still argue whether this adaptability was a strategic move or simply genuine cultural curiosity. Either way, it worked brilliantly, giving them unparalleled trust and access in markets from China to Byzantium. In fact, their ability to blend in was legendary. Imagine spotting a Sogdian merchant in Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, dressed fully in silk robes, speaking fluent Chinese, negotiating effortlessly with local buyers. The next season, that same merchant might appear in Persian garb, chatting comfortably in Pahlavi at a Persian bazaar. Today you'd probably call this cultural chameleoning, but back then, it was simply smart business. The sheer wealth circulating through these caravan cities is staggering. Sogdian merchants weren't merely traders. They were early pioneers of finance, credit systems, and banking networks. Transactions weren't just sacks of coins and bars of silver. They involved sophisticated ledgers and promissory notes carried across vast distances. Sure, there weren't fancy credit cards or convenient banking apps, but Sogdian scribes wielding their reed pens and papyrus scrolls were the fintech innovators of their day. One particularly fascinating aspect is the system of trust-based credit the Sogdians developed, known today as the Silk Road credit system. Essentially, merchants would extend credit to each other based on reputation alone. Think of it as ancient Yelp reviews. Mess up your credit once, and your Silk Road rating took a serious nosedive. Reputation was everything, and word traveled faster than a caffeinated pigeon. It encouraged honest dealings and formed an incredibly efficient and reliable trading network that modern economists still marvel at. Tonight, as the markets gradually quiet down, you glimpse merchants tallying their earnings, their faces illuminated by lamplight and the satisfaction of a good day's trade. Nearby, a group debates fiercely about the merits of silk from the eastern reaches compared to Persian brocades. You chuckle softly, noting how passionately they argue over fabric types, like modern-day tech enthusiasts debating Android versus Apple. As stars slowly reclaim the sky overhead, you notice merchants packing away their goods, their movements practiced and precise. Each trader has a ritual, a careful method of stacking fabrics, sealing spice jars, meticulously recording today's deals. Soon they'll retreat to nearby inns, sipping tea and swapping stories about caravan routes ahead. Many tales revolve around encounters with bandits, mythical creatures guarding treasures, or legendary merchants who defied impossible odds. Sure, some of it sounds exaggerated. Okay, most of it probably is. But who doesn't enjoy a good story? As the streets empty, shadows lengthen, and the city slips into its quieter nighttime persona. Somewhere nearby, a musician continues playing softly, the notes lingering gently in the cool night air. Sogdian caravan cities were more than just marketplaces. They were living theaters of human interaction, microcosms where culture, commerce, and creativity flourished side by side. And as you drift deeper into this vivid dream of ancient streets, your steps slowing naturally toward rest, you realize these vibrant cities were indeed silken dreams, richly woven, intricate, and mesmerizing. And honestly, if you've made it this far tonight without succumbing to sleep, congratulations. You're officially tougher than a Sogdian camel handler, though probably a lot less dusty. You're now gliding quietly into the softer shadows of the Silk Road, where trade wasn't measured in coins alone, but in whispered agreements and quiet nods. Welcome to the realm of the Sogdian merchant's most remarkable innovation, the unwritten contract. Picture yourself standing at a bustling crossroads, no paper or ink in sight, watching two merchants seal a deal with nothing but a firm handshake and a silent look. That's right. No lawyers, no fine print, just trust. Today, you'd probably panic without a written receipt for your coffee. Yet these traders casually exchanged fortunes on faith alone. For the Sogdians, honor was currency. Breaking a promise meant risking something far more valuable than silver: your reputation. Think of reputation as your ancient LinkedIn profile, just without annoying notifications. One slip, one shady deal, and everyone from China to Persia heard about it faster than bad gossip at your high school reunion. Keeping promises wasn't simply ethical, it was survival. Each handshake built a foundation for future prosperity. Each betrayal brought ruin. Watching a merchant caravan carefully unpack bundles of silk beneath flickering lanterns, you notice the quiet precision behind each action. Goods aren't simply inspected, they're admired, praised, and gently negotiated over cups of sweet tea. Bargaining is more dance than debate, conducted with subtle gestures, carefully phrased questions, and courteous nods. It's mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. The ancient version of subtle text messages exchanged under the table, but without emojis. Historically speaking, this informal yet incredibly reliable method became known as the trust-based trading system, and it thrived precisely because writing and literacy were luxuries, not guarantees. Paperwork was cumbersome, slow, and often impractical in deserts where sandstorms could erase entire caravan loads of documents in seconds. The Sogdians thus relied on memory, honor, and a reputation-based network so efficient it baffled outsiders. Historians still argue whether this trust system emerged out of necessity or whether the Sogdians simply had a uniquely honorable culture. Either way, it became their secret weapon, stronger than any fortress walls. Here's a quirky aside for you. In rare instances when they felt uneasy about an agreement, merchants might invoke strange rituals involving swearing oaths over bowls of water or grains of salt. Imagine sealing your next car loan by whispering solemn vows over your morning cereal. It might sound funny now, but back then, such rituals were taken as seriously as any modern legal document. You drift closer now, overhearing snippets of negotiation. A Chinese silk trader carefully describes the purity of his silk, his eyes steady and voice calm. Across from him, a Sogdian spice merchant listens intently, nodding thoughtfully. There's no aggression here, no shouting matches you'd expect at your local farmer's market. Each trader fully expects honesty, knowing deceit will eventually boomerang right back into their own caravan. But how exactly did this honor system work across vast distances and countless interactions? It wasn't magic, though to outsiders it seemed close enough. Caravan leaders maintained extensive mental records, memorizing names, faces, routes, and debts. They shared news about who paid debts promptly, who generously covered caravan repairs, and who might conveniently forget their wallet at lunchtime. Word traveled at astonishing speed, carried by travelers and merchants who were essentially the ancient world's version of Twitter, minus the trolls and hashtags. Sometimes merchants relied on letters of recommendation, carefully penned by trusted friends or partners. These letters were carried like precious cargo, wrapped securely in silk pouches. They described a trader's reliability and character in terms glowing enough to make modern resumes blush with envy. A single recommendation from a respected merchant could open trade routes, secure lucrative deals, and earn lifelong trust. Conversely, a negative word was devastating, like a one-star Yelp review tattooed permanently on your forehead. You pause for a moment to consider this system, marveling at how deeply it relied on honor and mutual respect. No contracts to sign, no fine print to squint at suspiciously, just a handshake and your word. Today, it sounds romantic or naive, yet for centuries it functioned flawlessly. Well, mostly flawlessly. Occasionally, disputes arose, solved by respected elders acting as arbitrators. Think Judge Judy, but with considerably fewer theatrics and infinitely more tea drinking. Tonight, as the marketplace begins to wind down, merchants gather in small groups, talking softly over steaming cups. You catch murmurs of deals struck, routes planned, and caravans departing soon. One merchant, older and weathered, smiles knowingly as he advises younger traders. Never promise more than your camels can carry. It's wise advice even now, particularly if you don't own camels. But perhaps the real beauty of the unwritten contract lies in its simplicity. Imagine a business world today based solely on trust. No lengthy contracts, no confusing clauses, just mutual respect and honor. It might sound absurdly utopian, yet this exact system sustained the richest trade network the world had ever known, stretching from the Mediterranean shores to China's bustling cities. You watch as the caravan leader carefully folds away his silks and spices for the night, his eyes filled with quiet satisfaction. Today's deals are done, tomorrow's routes planned. He trusts that those he's dealt with will uphold their promises, knowing his reputation guarantees they will. It's a silent agreement, one understood perfectly without needing a single word. As you step quietly away, lantern glow fading behind you, the gentle murmurs of merchants become softer, blending seamlessly into the whispers of the desert breeze. Tonight, beneath a canopy of stars, you've witnessed a forgotten marvel, the quiet magic of trust. Perhaps it seems fragile now, a relic of simpler times. Yet somehow, beneath your sleepy eyelids, you sense its strength, woven quietly into every handshake, every nod, every softly spoken promise. And honestly, if you've made it this far without drifting into dreams of paperwork-free bliss, congratulations. You've earned your honorary membership into the Ancient Silk Road Merchants Association. Don't worry, your camel will be delivered shortly. Drifting now deeper along the Silk Road, you notice how the merchants look upward toward the endless night sky. Stars weren't merely decorative lights up here. They were practically the Sogdians' business advisors. Imagine basing your major investment decisions on the alignment of planets rather than market analytics. That's right. Astrology wasn't just a curious hobby or Sunday newspaper filler. It was serious business. Merchants often delayed departures, contracts, and even marriages based on what their astrologers observed. Today, you'd probably hesitate before trusting a horoscope app to manage your retirement fund. But back then, celestial advice carried weight heavier than the sacks of spices strapped to their camels. Historians still argue whether astrology genuinely influenced success rates or simply boosted traders' confidence, making their deals smoother. Either way, it clearly worked, because the Sogdians thrived for centuries beneath the guidance of the stars. You stroll gently past a caravan where an elderly astrologer carefully unfolds a celestial map inked onto silk cloth. Merchants gather around, lanterns casting soft light across intricate patterns of constellations. The astrologer whispers quietly, pointing out celestial alignments. Venus shining auspiciously, Jupiter entering a favorable position. Traders nod knowingly, faces serious, absorbing this guidance as readily as modern entrepreneurs check stock updates. Here's tonight's quirky tidbit. Some astrologers would insist on setting caravan departure times down to the minute based on planetary positions. Imagine explaining to your boss you were late because Mercury was in retrograde. Although, to be fair, some modern offices might appreciate that reasoning, at least if they employ yoga instructors and matcha lattes in the break room. Astrology's influence even seeped into everyday life decisions. Imagine you're a Sogdian merchant pondering whether to accept a lucrative deal. Rather than consulting your gut or even a trusted friend, you'd visit your astrologer, who would carefully note planetary positions, moon phases, and star movements. He might solemnly declare, Mars is opposing Saturn, warning against hasty decisions, or optimistically proclaim, Venus favors trade, urging you confidently toward profit. Yes, planetary alignment was basically ancient Silk Road LinkedIn, except with fewer selfies and far more celestial bodies. The Sogdians didn't just casually dabble in astrology, they built it into their identity. Coins minted in Sogdian cities frequently bore symbols of the zodiac, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, circulated alongside Chinese coins marked with dragons and emperors. These coins didn't just buy goods, they subtly conveyed celestial legitimacy, quietly signaling that merchants were cosmically sanctioned in their wealth. After all, who could question your fortune when the stars themselves approved? Ambling further into the caravan camp, you overhear animated conversations about celestial omens. Traders swap stories about previous journeys, some successful, others marred by storms and bandits. They debate earnestly whether certain outcomes resulted from planetary misalignments or simply bad luck. Sogdians had a particularly nuanced view of luck. It wasn't just random chance, but something influenced profoundly by careful reading of the heavens. Astrology, to them, was the ancient equivalent of market research. Except, instead of charts and graphs, you got constellations and moon phases. Interestingly, some historians suggest that merchants knowingly manipulated astrology to their advantage. Imagine confidently telling your trading partner, I'm sorry, the stars say today isn't favorable for me. Maybe tomorrow. Especially if you secretly just needed extra time to negotiate better terms. Astrology thus doubled as both genuine belief and convenient business tactic. Clever, right? Nearby, the astrologer finishes advising merchants, carefully folding his star chart. Merchants depart quietly, minds already plotting tomorrow's journeys. Astrology's power rested not simply in prediction, but in shaping merchants' attitudes, confidence or caution, risk or safety. The stars guided not only their actions, but also their emotional resilience. If a deal soured, merchants didn't blame poor judgment. They calmly accepted the stars had simply chosen differently today. Imagine never losing sleep over mistakes, comforted knowing the universe shared responsibility. Yet astrology wasn't infallible. Occasionally, predictions failed spectacularly. Caravans lost despite perfect planetary alignments, profits soaring despite ominous forecasts. Such instances sparked passionate debates among merchants. Some argued astrology's limits, others insisted unseen celestial factors influenced outcomes. These debates, though unresolved, never diminished astrology's status. Instead, they deepened Sogdian curiosity, compelling astrologers toward greater precision. You can almost picture their celestial consultants frantically recalculating star charts, muttering quietly about unseen eclipses or sneaky retrogrades. Tonight, though, beneath the open sky, stars feel reassuring rather than complicated. The caravan astrologer gazes upward quietly, perhaps contemplating tomorrow's advice. Merchants drift toward sleep beneath constellations that have watched over Silk Road caravans for centuries. And as your own eyes grow heavier, you recognize something comforting in astrology's gentle certainty, however mystical or irrational it may seem. After all, modern life isn't entirely free from astrology's echoes. How many still sneak glances at horoscope apps or casually mention zodiac signs on first dates? Humans always sought guidance from above, interpreting celestial patterns to comfort anxieties, explain fortunes, and steady nerves. The stars glitter softly above, indifferent yet strangely comforting, illuminating the resting caravans below. In a world of uncertainty, maybe believing in celestial guidance wasn't naive but practical, a quiet reassurance beneath vast desert skies. The Sogdians navigated their challenging trade routes, armed with meticulous celestial maps, a calm belief in destiny, and the humble acceptance that some forces remained beyond human control. Tonight, beneath these familiar constellations, you drift toward sleep amid caravans gently humming beneath starlight. Merchants trust tomorrow's stars to guide their paths and fortunes once more, quietly confident in cosmic approval. And honestly, if you've made it this far without dreaming of planetary alignments or zodiac-inspired trade forecasts, you might just be tougher than a Sogdian astrologer, though likely a bit less mystical. You move deeper into the tranquil night, your steps muffled by soft desert sand as you notice merchants whispering gentle prayers to gods whose names are long forgotten. See, the Sogdians didn't just rely on astrological forecasts, they also invoked an intriguing collection of gods and goddesses to ensure safe passage across the harsh deserts. If you thought navigating sand dunes and scorching heat was challenging enough, try doing it without divine backup. Definitely not advisable. As a gentle desert breeze rustles through your hair, you overhear caravan masters quietly murmuring offerings to gods like Weshparkar, a deity few today remember, yet once revered as guardian of the winds. Merchants would discreetly scatter tiny offerings of grain or droplets of wine onto desert sands, hoping this small gesture might encourage Weshparkar to guide breezes favorably. Imagine relying on divine wind management for smooth sailing through deserts. Today, you'd probably opt for GPS navigation, but back then, divine intervention seemed just as reasonable. But here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. One obscure deity known to scholars as Farnbag supposedly protected travelers specifically from scorpions. Picture nervously trekking across the desert, anxiously whispering Farnbag's name to ward off tiny yet terrifying threats hiding beneath your camel's shadow. It's basically the ancient equivalent of bug spray, except more mystical and probably less reliable. Historians still argue whether these obscure deities represented a unified pantheon or simply local gods merchants borrowed along routes. The Sogdians, always practical, adapted readily, incorporating gods wherever they traveled. They might worship Persian Ahura Mazda in one oasis, Buddhist bodhisattvas in another, and Weshparkar between them. It was less theological confusion and more strategic devotion. Each god invoked precisely where needed. If divine diversity boosted survival odds, who were they to argue theology? Your caravan companions now quietly pause to set small altars beneath moonlit skies. Offerings carefully arranged, bits of fruit, tiny copper coins, even miniature silk scraps symbolizing gratitude and hopeful wishes. Merchants bow softly, murmuring prayers to local gods, each carefully named, remembered, and honored. Faith here wasn't grandiose or dramatic. It was quietly practical, modest rituals performed daily, gently woven into caravan routines. One fascinating historical fact emerges here. Sogdian merchants often carried small bronze figurines of their favored deities. These tiny statues traveled tucked safely inside leather pouches, their presence comforting traders in remote deserts. Picture pulling out your favorite deity figurine mid-journey, part divine charm, part spiritual companion, entirely practical insurance against desert misfortune. Today, you'd probably chuckle at pocket-sized gods, yet back then, they felt reassuringly solid amid endless sands. Interestingly, local guides often offered their own interpretations of divine signs, winds shifting unexpectedly, desert birds circling unusually. Every subtle change was carefully analyzed, considered divine messaging, rather than random natural occurrence. Imagine halting your entire caravan journey because a single bird landed oddly. Yet back then, merchants interpreted these signs seriously, adjusting routes and schedules accordingly. And here's another curious practice. Some merchants, deeply concerned about unfavorable omens, quietly performed rituals to trick malevolent spirits. They'd pretend to abandon a caravan temporarily, leaving behind small piles of offerings designed specifically to mislead spirits. Imagine attempting to trick supernatural forces by casually sneaking away. Think ghosting, but with actual spirits instead of awkward dating scenarios. Tonight, though, beneath calm starlight, caravan traders gather quietly around small fires, sharing gentle stories of previous journeys protected by obscure gods. Each tale carries careful details about divine interventions, winds that suddenly shifted beneficially, scorpions oddly avoiding certain caravans, desert wells appearing unexpectedly. Whether factual or embellished hardly matters. Merchants found comfort recounting these quiet miracles, each softly reassuring weary travelers beneath vast desert skies. As your eyes grow heavier, you overhear quiet debates among younger merchants questioning the efficacy of various gods. Some express skepticism, wondering aloud if divine interventions were merely fortunate coincidences. Older merchants smile knowingly, nodding gently, yet insisting quietly. Perhaps the gods work subtly, nudging fortune quietly rather than dramatically. It's a gentle reminder of faith's subtlety, its quiet presence felt rather than dramatically seen. Yet the most striking aspect here is how casually the Sogdians accepted divine protection. There were no grand ceremonies, no dramatic temples, just quiet, humble offerings made discreetly, almost modestly. Merchants accepted divine favor casually, gratefully acknowledging small mercies granted amidst harsh deserts. Perhaps true faith lies precisely here. Quiet acceptance, gratitude softly whispered beneath starlight, knowing God's gently guided travelers across harsh sands. Tonight, beneath endless desert skies, traders murmur final prayers, carefully extinguishing small altar candles. The caravan settles gently into restful silence, comforted by divine protection quietly invoked. You sense faith's gentle presence here, softly felt rather than loudly proclaimed, quietly sustaining merchants across vast deserts. As your eyelids drift heavier, the comforting rhythm of murmured prayers mingles seamlessly with gentle desert breezes rustling softly overhead. Merchants sleep peacefully beneath watchful gods, quietly trusting divine favor to guide tomorrow's journey. Perhaps faith here feels simpler, gentler, quietly comforting travelers across deserts vast and uncertain. And honestly, if you've made it this far tonight without whispering quiet prayers to obscure desert gods, congratulations, you're officially braver than a Sogdian scorpion handler, though probably less religiously versatile. Sleep now beneath quiet desert skies, comforted by gentle whispers of forgotten gods, softly watching overhead. You continue your quiet stroll beneath the moonlit caravan encampments, your footsteps now gently tracing paths toward Silk Road intrigue. The Sogdians, you see, weren't merely merchants of silk and spices. They were also subtle gatherers of whispered secrets. Imagine the Silk Road not just as a network of trade routes, but as a complex web of discrete intelligence-gathering operations. Silk and spice spies. Now there's a job description you'd never find on modern job listings. Tonight, as you pass softly illuminated tents, you notice quiet exchanges happening in shadows. A passing note, a hushed word, information discreetly changing hands. For the Sogdians, trading wasn't only about profits, it was also about knowledge. Information traveled the Silk Road faster than the swiftest camel caravan, and the merchants who mastered this flow held power far exceeding the value of mere textiles or exotic fragrances. Sogdian merchants operated in a curious dual role, openly respected traders and quietly acknowledged intelligence gatherers. Imagine sitting in a bustling tea house, casually sipping sweetened tea, pretending idleness, while carefully noting whispered conversations around you. Who was feuding with whom in the Persian court? Which Chinese noble secretly negotiated trade deals? These tiny whispers, seemingly insignificant, gradually wove into powerful narratives of strategic advantage. Historians still argue whether the Sogdians intentionally pursued espionage or simply stumbled into it as an inevitable consequence of their extensive networks. Perhaps both were true. Merchants might have initially gathered information casually, soon realizing its immense strategic value. They quietly adapted, becoming subtly indispensable as sources of intelligence for distant empires eager for Silk Road gossip. Here's your quirky tidbit. Occasionally, Sogdians delivered messages hidden cleverly inside hollowed-out objects, jars, walking sticks, even shoes. Imagine being a spy whose success depended entirely on your footwear's structural integrity. Definitely not your typical fashion concern today. Yet, these ingenious methods quietly enabled delicate secrets to travel unnoticed amid silk caravans and bustling bazaars. As you pause briefly outside one softly glowing tent, you overhear a quiet conversation between merchants. They discuss subtle shifts within distant courts, trading routes quietly altered, rebellions brewing in obscure regions. The casual ease of these discussions reveals how naturally intelligence gathering integrated into merchant life. Just another type of cargo carried carefully along the Silk Road. Sogdians became quietly renowned for their reliability in intelligence circles. Foreign rulers eagerly consulted them, not openly, but discreetly, trusting their whispered information. Imagine emperors and kings carefully consulting humble merchants, valuing their quiet knowledge above grand counselors. This subtle power inversion quietly amused Sogdian traders, who perhaps enjoyed being quietly influential beneath their modest silk merchant guise. Interestingly, merchant spies often enjoyed special protection precisely because of their intelligence roles. Bandits and warlords, notoriously hostile to caravans, quietly avoided attacking certain merchant groups known for their powerful connections. Imagine bandits actively ignoring lucrative caravan targets because their leaders valued whispered secrets. Merchants carried more than stolen silk. In this quietly strange economy, information was indeed power and protection. Yet the line between merchant and spy wasn't always distinct. Many Sogdians moved fluidly between roles, selling spices openly one moment, quietly relaying sensitive diplomatic messages the next. Imagine effortlessly blending into a bustling marketplace, casually inspecting silks while quietly noting which foreign ambassadors conversed secretly in shadowed alcoves. Today, You'd call this multitasking. Back then, merchants simply called it business as usual. But how exactly did merchants become trusted spies? It wasn't elaborate training or cloak and dagger dramatics. It was quiet trust built gradually over countless caravan journeys. Repeated interactions established credibility, merchants carefully proving themselves reliable through minor exchanges. Eventually, trust deepened enough for foreign officials to share sensitive information quietly. Each whispered secret gradually building into vast intelligence networks carefully maintained by Sogdian traders. Tonight, you watch quietly as merchants carefully encode notes onto thin sheets of silk, messages hidden discreetly within woven patterns or embroidered decorations. These coded silks traveled openly yet invisibly, delicate textile encryption quietly defying detection. Historians still marvel at such methods, amazed at how merchants casually transported vital information through routine trade goods. Silk scarves weren't merely fashion accessories. They quietly became vessels of espionage, softly whispering secrets along dusty caravan trails. Yet the most fascinating aspect remains how naturally espionage integrated into merchant identities. Sogdians never dramatically revealed themselves as spies. They quietly maintained humble merchant personas, subtly gathering intelligence beneath innocent silk and spice exchanges. This quiet espionage perhaps reveals their true genius, integrating subtle intelligence work seamlessly into everyday caravan life. A quiet brilliance modern spies might envy. Tonight, beneath gentle starlight, merchants quietly exchange final messages, their whispers mingling seamlessly with distant desert winds. Secrets travel softly through encampments, subtly reshaping tomorrow's journeys. You sense quiet pride among these merchant spies, quietly aware their discreet whispers shape distant empires in ways silk alone never could. As your eyelids grow heavier, you consider how quietly powerful information became along these ancient routes, trade blending gently into espionage, secrets softly hidden beneath innocuous cargo. Perhaps true power lies precisely here, in quiet whispers, subtle intelligence gently exchanged beneath starlit desert skies. So tonight, as merchants quietly settle into restful sleep, trusting their whispers to travel softly into tomorrow, you drift gently toward dreams of subtle espionage quietly interwoven within silk caravan trails. And honestly, if you've made it this far tonight, without imagining yourself as an ancient spy quietly encrypting silk messages, congratulations, you're officially stealthier than a Sogdian silk courier, though probably far less discreet. Rest now beneath stars, quietly observing centuries of whispered secrets, softly carried on desert winds. You wake slowly into a caravan city at dawn, the desert light soft and gold, and the silence thick with anticipation. Today isn't about bartering or secret messages, it's about beauty. Because while Sogdian merchants made their name in trade and whispers, they were also accidental artists. Or maybe not so accidental. They had a knack for leaving behind trails of culture as effortlessly as camel prints in sand. You wander through a shaded alley painted with faded murals. Reds, blues, and ochres blend together in ancient patterns, peeling just slightly with age. These aren't random decorations. This is Sogdian art, subtle but striking. The kind that doesn't yell for attention, but gets under your skin anyway. It's in the curve of a horse's neck on a pottery shard, in the intricate embroidery of a merchant's robe, in the precise brushstroke of a dragon coiled across a silk scroll. Most people don't realize it, but Sogdian merchants weren't just trading commodities, they were quietly shaping aesthetic taste from Persia to China. Like cultural pollen, their artistic sensibilities drifted through empires, fertilizing the visual traditions of vastly different worlds. They weren't kings or generals, yet their hands helped mold the very look of Eurasia. Take Dunhuang, for example, a major stop along the Silk Road. There, inside caves carved into cliffs, Buddhist murals stretch for miles, painted over centuries. And guess what? Sogdian influences are all over them. Their signature motifs, wild horses, floating dancers, detailed storytelling panels, blend seamlessly into Chinese religious art. Historians still argue whether the Sogdians brought these ideas as artists, or if their traded goods simply inspired local craftsmen. But either way, their fingerprints are unmistakable. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Sogdian caravan leaders hired artists to travel with them, painting as they went, not to sell, but to record landscapes, markets, even memorable dinner parties. Yes, essentially ancient travel bloggers, except with brushes instead of Instagram filters. You can almost imagine a dusty merchant camp pausing to pose while an artist furiously sketched, muttering something like, "No one move, this lighting is perfect." As you meander deeper into the city, you spot artisans working side by side, Persian tile makers next to Chinese woodcarvers, Sogdian embroiderers stitching patterns that swirl like wind-blown leaves. The Sogdians weren't just absorbers of culture, they were remixers. They took a bit from here, borrowed a touch from there, and added their own desert-born flair. You know those fusion restaurants where you're not quite sure what continent the dish came from, but it somehow works? That's Sogdian art in a nutshell. Walk into a Buddhist temple in Xi'an, and you might see a celestial figure wearing distinctly Persian robes. Flip through a Persian manuscript and find a phoenix with distinctly Central Asian feathers. You start noticing the echoes, the threads tying it all together, and surprise, it's usually the Sogdians quietly stitching behind the scenes. Even their clothing became a form of artistic exchange. Sogdian silk robes, richly dyed and embroidered with mythic creatures, were not only beautiful, they were billboards of identity. Every pattern had meaning. Animals signaled strength or fortune, waves symbolized movement or transition. Wearing one was like wrapping yourself in a storybook. The Sogdians didn't just sell luxury, they wore it like walking advertisements for aesthetic diplomacy. And while some of their art survives in museums today, most has vanished, lost to time, war, and sand. Yet fragments keep appearing. Archaeologists digging along the Taklamakan Desert still occasionally find bits of Sogdian design. A bronze mirror etched with hybrid motifs, a child's shoe sewn with a dragon made of peacock feathers. Tiny, quiet testaments to a culture that never shouted, but always left its mark. Tonight, as dusk softens the colors of the desert city, artists continue their quiet work. You sit beside one as she paints by lamplight, adding delicate brushstrokes to a scene of two traders sharing tea beneath a fig tree. Her hand moves without hesitation, as though she's painting a memory rather than an image. You ask where she learned the style, and she smiles, pointing upward toward the stars. "Passed down," she says, "from before the wind took their names." Sogdian art wasn't just about beauty, it was about remembering, about embedding memory into fabric, stone, pigment. Even the smallest carved detail was a way to whisper across centuries, "We were here, we mattered." And even if you forget our names, maybe you'll see a pattern and feel something stir. As the light fades, murals cast longer shadows, and artisans roll up their fabrics and tools for the night. Their work doesn't stop, it just continues quietly, in dreams, in stories, in the soft folds of a silk scarf someone might wear thousands of miles away. You can feel it now, that gentle pulse of aesthetic continuity, like a quiet heartbeat woven into the Silk Road's dusty spine. And if you've made it this far tonight without sketching a desert dragon in your imagination or redecorating your dream house in Sogdian motifs, congratulations. You're officially more resistant to cultural inspiration than a stone Buddha with sunglasses. Rest easy now, surrounded by beauty older than memory, and sleep beneath murals the wind itself remembers. As morning sunlight spills slowly across the Silk Road city, your eyes catch on something small but strange. Etched letters on a crumbling stone slab, curling into loops and lines like ivy climbing a forgotten wall. It's Sogdian script, one of the world's most quietly influential writing systems, now barely readable to anyone alive. And yet, once upon a time, it danced across scrolls, temple walls, contracts, and carvings, as vital and fluid as the desert winds themselves. You crouch beside the carving, trying to trace the script with your finger. It's not decorative, it's practical, sharp, efficient. Sogdian merchants were constantly on the move, and so was their writing. The script itself evolved to be quick to jot, hard to smudge, and easy to learn, assuming you didn't mind memorizing characters that resembled a fusion of Persian elegance and Aramaic backbone. It was the courier font of its day, the universal read me fast typeface for letters, ledgers, and coded silk messages. What's wild is how far this script traveled. From the deserts of Central Asia to the gates of China, Sogdian writing served as the bridge language of trade. A merchant from Samarkand might use it to write to a Buddhist temple in China, who'd then annotate in Chinese and pass it on to a Nestorian priest who spoke Syriac. It was linguistic jazz, improvised, vibrant, and strangely harmonious. Here's your quirky tidbit. One famous Sogdian letter discovered in a trash heap outside an ancient Chinese city included complaints about overpriced silk, an unfaithful business partner, and someone's truly horrific cooking. Proof that even 1,500 years ago, people wrote passive-aggressive notes when disappointed by dinner. Historians still argue whether the Sogdian script directly inspired later writing systems along the Silk Road, like the Uyghur script and eventually the Mongolian vertical script used under Genghis Khan's empire. What's clear is that the Sogdian alphabet didn't die. It morphed. It flowed through centuries like water finding new paths through stone, adapting, adjusting, reappearing in new dialects and shapes. You watch as a young boy in a corner of the city diligently copies old inscriptions onto papyrus with a reed brush. His grandfather watches, correcting the occasional stroke, muttering about sloppy loops. The scene feels both ancient and familiar, like an old man helping a child with cursive handwriting homework. Except here, the stakes are memory itself. Without this effort, these symbols risk dissolving into the dust of lost tongues. The Sogdian language itself was a blend of Eastern and Western threads. Persian influences shaped its rhythm, while Turkic expressions gave it spice, and Indian vocabulary added unexpected color. The result? A rich, hybrid tongue that allowed merchants to converse in ways that felt familiar to nearly everyone along the trade route. You could say it was the Silk Road's version of English, fluid, mixed, and brilliantly adaptable. But writing wasn't just for business. Sogdians used their script in tombs, poems, and prayers. You stroll through a partially excavated burial chamber where faded inscriptions cover the walls. They're not somber, they're vibrant. One reads like a travel journal of the deceased, describing markets, lovers, meals, and favorite camel routes. Who knew the afterlife had Yelp reviews? In some rare places, you find bilingual inscriptions, Sogdian paired with Chinese or Sanskrit, almost like ancient translation guides. This reveals a merchant class not only literate, but intentionally cross-cultural. They didn't guard their language like a secret. They broadcasted it, adapted it, and made it easy for others to learn. That inclusiveness made them irresistible trading partners. Wouldn't you rather do business with someone who already speaks your dialect and also complements your carpet weaving? And yet, despite all its elegance and utility, the Sogdian language began to fade as the centuries passed. Empires changed, Arabic gained prominence, Chinese became dominant in the East. And little by little, this graceful script was spoken less, written rarer, taught infrequently. Eventually, it became a language of ghosts and scholars, something you study in quiet rooms filled with cracked manuscripts and dust-laced silence. Tonight, however, you're not in a library. You're here, feeling the weight of words long since silenced, yet never quite gone. The Sogdian script still lingers in grooves of stone, in forgotten diaries, in temple murals where painted gods stare silently back. It might not be alive in conversation anymore, but in art, in memory, in curiosity, it still hums quietly beneath the surface. A young merchant walks by, humming a tune in modern Uzbek, oblivious to the stone inscription under his feet. But you stop and stare, your finger still tracing those mysterious symbols, feeling the odd comfort that someone, somewhere, still notices, still cares. And honestly, if you've made it this far without doodling fake ancient scripts in your notebook or trying to invent your own merchant alphabet, congratulations. You're officially more grounded than a Sogdian calligrapher, with too much wine and not enough parchment. Rest now, knowing the language of a forgotten people still echoes in quiet corners of the world, waiting patiently for curious minds like yours to listen again. The light softens as you enter a courtyard tucked behind a tea house, the air warm with the scent of jasmine and fermented fruit. Laughter drifts lazily from a nearby window. But this isn't a place for trade or tallying profits. This is where romance bloomed, where hearts made decisions that trade ledgers never could. You're stepping into a different kind of Silk Road exchange, the kind wrapped in longing looks, stolen glances, and the occasional scandalous letter tucked into a shipment of cloves. Because if you thought the Sogdians were only about silk, spices, and subtle espionage, you haven't heard the half of it. These merchants didn't just pass through lands, they connected with them, deeply and often intimately. Their personal lives were woven into the very fabric of their trade. And sometimes, those connections weren't just transactional, they were transformational. You sip warm tea beside a fountain as an old woman nearby recounts, half laughing, half sighing, the tale of her grandmother, a Sogdian trader's daughter, who fell in love with a local monk in Luoyang. The monk gave up his vows. The daughter gave up the caravan life. Together, they opened a school that taught both Buddhist scripture and Sogdian bookkeeping. Historians might skim over these stories, but they're everywhere. Quiet romances that bridged empires, challenged traditions, and left behind grandchildren fluent in 5 languages and confused about which holiday to celebrate. Here's your quirky tidbit. One Sogdian trader's love letters were found centuries later, buried in a jar of preserved dates. The ink had faded, but the longing hadn't. "I wait for your hands in every market crowd," one line reads. If that doesn't make you sigh dramatically into your pillow tonight, nothing will. Relationships formed on the Silk Road weren't always smooth. Marriages between Sogdians and locals often caused friction. between families, communities, even religions. Yet they persisted, quietly reshaping demographics and cultures. Sogdian women, known for their independence and education, often became cultural ambassadors in foreign lands. Their children grew up blending languages, wearing mixed robes, praying to multiple gods, or sometimes none at all. The result wasn't confusion, it was innovation. Historians still argue whether these interwoven relationships diluted or enriched the Sogdian identity. But that's the wrong question, really. The better question is, can identity ever be static when you live on the road? The Sogdians weren't losing themselves, they were expanding, adapting. And in doing so, they helped create hybrid communities that thrived on shared stories, blended cuisines, and inside jokes told in 3 languages. You wander through a residential quarter where old murals depict scenes of daily life. In one, a Chinese man shares wine with a Sogdian woman beneath a fig tree. In another, a Persian child plays with a Sogdian boy, chasing a hoop down a narrow alley. These aren't grand frescoes of war or kings. They're portraits of affection, laughter, and everyday intimacy. The real stuff of history. And it wasn't just personal unions. Cultural customs intertwined just as easily. Sogdian wedding rites incorporated fire rituals from Zoroastrianism, tea ceremonies from China, and poetic recitations borrowed from Persian courtships. Imagine proposing to someone by reciting a verse about camels and eternal flame under a banyan tree while balancing a tea tray. Weirdly specific? Sure, but strangely romantic. Even burial traditions reflected this merging. Sogdian tombs in China often blended native and local iconography. Some contained Buddhist symbols alongside Zoroastrian motifs, guarded by Chinese-style lion dogs. Death didn't end cultural exchange. It immortalized it in stone. One scholar even called these graves love letters to multiple worlds, which sounds a lot more poetic than your average tombstone. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the courtyard, you notice a group of young couples laughing beneath lanterns. Some wear tunics with Sogdian embroidery, others Chinese silks or Persian sashes. They're talking in a blend of dialects, weaving their own version of what the Silk Road always was. A place where love didn't care what empire your family came from. One couple pauses to light a small paper lantern, releasing it into the sky. It rises gently, wobbling at first, then catching a warm breeze. You follow it with your eyes until it disappears among the stars. In that moment, it's easy to imagine a caravan far away, following that same star trail, carrying not just goods, but memories, stories, promises. And if you're still awake right now, maybe you feel that softness too, that the greatest exchanges along the Silk Road weren't measured in spices or coin, but in moments of intimacy that rewrote boundaries. People met, they stayed, or they didn't, but something always lingered. So tonight, as the desert air cools and the stars lean in closer, let your mind wander to those quiet, tangled love stories carried in the dust behind every camel's step. And honestly, if you've made it this far without daydreaming about your own Silk Road romance, or planning to name your future child Tamerlane, congratulations. You're officially more emotionally grounded than a Sogdian in spring. Rest now, wrapped in stories of connection, and let your dreams whisper with the warm laughter of caravan courtyards and lanterns drifting slowly through a starlit sky. By now, you know the Sogdians weren't just merchants. They were artists, lovers, linguists, stargazers, and sometimes, without ever donning a crown, diplomats. You walk slowly through a stone-paved corridor shaded by dried vines, where merchant families once gathered to plan not only sales, but strategy. Because on the Silk Road, power didn't always come from armies. Sometimes it came from a good deal, a well-placed favor, or knowing when to smile and say absolutely nothing. You're entering the delicate world of Sogdian diplomacy, where trade routes crossed empires and merchants quietly navigated the cracks between giants. Think of it as geopolitical tightrope walking, performed without a net, in sandals, while holding a bag of saffron worth a small fortune. The Sogdians were rarely conquerors. They didn't command armies or build vast fortresses, but they knew how to stay in the good graces of whoever happened to be in charge, whether it was the Tang emperors of China, the Sassanid Persians, or the various Turkic khaganates that kept popping up like unpredictable weather systems. That ability to smile, adapt, and offer a perfectly timed gift was their shield. Silk and gold, spices and honeyed words, all carried equal weight in the Sogdian arsenal. And here's your quirky tidbit. At least one Sogdian merchant, known as Anjia, was buried with a carved stone relief showing him seated between Chinese and Central Asian nobles, sipping tea and discussing trade. It's history's most chill diplomatic summit, and scholars still puzzle over whether it's symbolic, literal, or just very ambitious posthumous branding. The truth is, Sogdians often served as intermediaries between warring powers. Need to send a delicate message to a neighboring empire, but don't trust your own officials not to start a scandal. Send a Sogdian. Their caravans were neutral zones, their markets public spaces, their homes open-air embassies. Trust, once again, was their currency. Only now, they spent it on peace. Historians still argue whether their diplomatic success was a result of strategy or simply the byproduct of constant movement and adaptation. But whether accidental or intentional, their role was undeniable. One day, a Sogdian merchant might host a Persian noble and a Chinese envoy at the same table. The next, he'd be arranging a marriage between two merchant families, one Buddhist, one Zoroastrian, to solidify trade across disputed borders. And all the while, pretending not to notice the swords hanging behind everyone's chairs. You pass under an arch where old letters were once read aloud, carefully phrased messages from emperors thanking the Sogdians for loyal service and continued cooperation. These weren't just perfunctory niceties, they were political lifelines. Being in favor meant safer trade routes, fewer taxes, and sometimes a direct line to the imperial ear. The Sogdians didn't demand power. They earned influence, slowly, gently, like water wearing down stone. One famous example comes to mind, the Great Tang Welcome. During China's Tang dynasty, Sogdian communities thrived so much in Chang'an, modern Xi'an, that local officials granted them positions as honorary envoys. They built fire temples and threw famously boisterous New Year festivals, complete with masked dancers, fruit towers, and far more wine than strictly necessary. The emperor didn't mind. He understood that keeping the Sogdians happy meant his merchants kept humming, and the spice shelves stayed full. But diplomacy wasn't always smooth. In times of war or religious tension, Sogdians walked a razor-thin line. Accused of espionage, forced to pay sudden tribute, or squeezed between rival factions, they often relied on cunning rather than confrontation. They'd redirect caravans, forge temporary alliances, or lose valuable goods into the hands of threatening officials who, oddly enough, never mentioned taxes again. You pause at a market square that once served as neutral ground between two warring city-states. Here, under a canopy of woven cloth, enemies once shared roasted lamb and traded gossip while pretending not to negotiate peace. It's oddly touching, proof that even during conflict, humans crave familiarity, good food, and apparently Sogdian figs. And yet, their diplomacy extended beyond politics. The Sogdians also brokered cultural exchange. They translated religious texts, introduced music styles, and even acted as mediators in theological disputes. A Buddhist monk upset about temple taxes? A Zoroastrian priest annoyed by a camel-related offense? Send in the Sogdians. They'd smooth it over with tact, a proverb, and a complimentary length of silk. Tonight, as the wind picks up faintly through the alleyways, you catch the echo of soft voices, discussions over tea, arrangements being made, borders subtly redrawn without a single sword raised. You imagine those long-gone diplomats seated cross-legged beneath lanterns, tired but pleased, having just convinced two empires not to go to war over a misunderstanding involving sheep and water rights. So if you've made it this far without picturing yourself as a Sogdian backroom negotiator sipping wine and casually preventing geopolitical disaster with nothing but your charm and a cinnamon stick, congratulations. You're officially less diplomatic than a merchant with a camel load of secret treaties. Rest now, soothed by the quiet art of subtle influence, and know that history was shaped just as much by the handshakes in shaded courtyards as it was by thundering armies. Sleep gently, ambassador of dreams. As you step quietly away from the calm echo of diplomatic courtyards, a chill creeps into the air. It's subtle at first, the kind that makes you pull your robe a little tighter, glance up at the moon just to make sure it's still watching. You sense it before you see it. Something in the air has shifted. The Silk Road, once so alive with color, stories, and trust, begins to show signs of wear. The laughter isn't quite as loud. The markets aren't quite as crowded. Darkness, slow and soft-footed, starts to settle over the routes that once shimmered like spun gold. You walk through a caravanserai now half empty. A few stalls remain, clinging on, their owners keeping faces bright though the goods are thinner, the buyers fewer. A spice seller wraps up his last pouch of saffron, whispering that the next shipment might not come. Bandits, they say, or tariffs, or rumors of rebellion flickering like wildfire across mountain passes. Because here's the truth, the Golden Age was never going to last. Silk Road history, like any great road, had cracks. You begin to feel them here, small at first, then spreading wider, deeper. Banditry rises as empires weaken. Once patrolled trade routes become gauntlets of risk. You pass by a camel with scars on its flank, and a trader murmurs that it survived an ambush near Kashgar. The attackers didn't want the goods. They wanted the maps. Control the routes, you see, and you control the future. The Sogdians knew this better than anyone. And now, so did their enemies. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some desperate traders disguised their camels with ash and mud to look diseased, hoping bandits would steer clear. Camel cosplay as a survival tactic? It's real, and surprisingly effective. Empires that once embraced Sogdian merchants begin to close their doors. In China, the Tang dynasty falters. A rebellion flares in 755, and Lucian's uprising. It rips through the empire like a wildfire doused in oil. Sogdian communities, once so integral, find themselves suddenly labeled as foreign, suspicious. Some flee. Others are attacked. Their temples are looted. Their homes set aflame. Historians still argue whether the backlash against the Sogdians was rooted in genuine fear, xenophobia, or merely political convenience. But the result is clear. The welcome mat, once laid across the east, is yanked away. Sogdians begin to retreat, not in a dramatic mass exodus, but quietly, caravan by caravan, family by family, like stars dimming one by one before dawn. You follow one such retreating caravan through a narrow mountain pass. The wind howls louder here. Gone are the storytellers and musicians, the bright silks and laughing children. What remains are worn faces, cautious eyes, and camels carrying fewer luxuries and more dried meat, more tools, more weapons. This is survival mode, and it is stark. And yet, the collapse doesn't happen overnight. For decades, Sogdians adapt, as they always have. They take new routes, shorten their journeys, lean more on regional trade. But the world around them is changing faster than they can pivot. Islam begins sweeping across Persia and Central Asia, reshaping identities, politics, and priorities. New powers rise, some friendly, many not. The old Sogdian strategy of neutrality becomes harder to maintain. You can't be everyone's friend when the world splits into sides. Diplomatic tea ceremonies start looking naive in the face of crusades and jihads. And gradually, invisibly, Sogdian influence fades from the maps. You walk through a caravan city now nearly silent. Wind sweeps through empty courtyards. A half-collapsed temple still clings to its painted walls, gods staring down from cracked plaster, eyes dulled by centuries of dust. There's something haunting in the stillness. Not tragedy, exactly, but absence. You can feel the echo of what was, the way you feel the memory of warmth after a candle flickers out. And yet, even in collapse, the Sogdians leave something behind. Stories, artifacts, murals, multilingual graffiti in cave temples, names scratched lovingly into stone. You find one tonight, beneath the dust on a carved doorway. Tarkun and Ruxana were here. It was a good year. A note, probably written in jest, but now strangely touching. A whisper from the past, refusing to be fully erased. You sit near that doorway as the wind picks up, dry and coarse. In the distance, another caravan plods silently over the horizon. Maybe they're descendants, maybe not. But something in their gait feels familiar. The way they move without complaint. How they guard their camels closely. How they watch the stars. So if you've made it this far without feeling that gentle, aching sadness, that ache for something lost not to violence, but to time itself, congratulations. You're officially tougher than a Sogdian mapmaker watching his favorite cities vanish beneath the ink of new empires. Tonight, sleep with the understanding that even the greatest roads can grow quiet. But silence doesn't mean erasure. Footsteps may fade, but the paths remain. The world remembers, if only in fragments, and tonight, so do you. You wake in the gray stillness of a place left behind. Gone is the music, the bargaining, the laughter that once filled these walls. All around you now, quiet stone, faded frescoes, archways leading to nowhere. You're walking through a ghost city, a once vibrant Sogdian trade hub now swallowed by time and sand. The buildings aren't ruins exactly. They're more like echoes. A merchant house still stands, its carved doors cracked but intact. You run your hand along the wood, feeling grooves worn by generations of hands, some closing deals, some pushing through with arms full of spices, some simply coming home. The house is empty now, save for dust motes swirling in golden shafts of morning light. But it doesn't feel abandoned. It feels paused. This is what the Sogdians left behind when they disappeared. Not craters or wreckage, but whispers. You see them in the graffiti etched into stone. Dates, names, brief notes. North route is dry this season. Blessings on the caravan from Bukhara. One scrawl simply reads, "Wait for me." A traveler's promise? A lover's plea? Historians still debate whether such writings were formal markings or fleeting moments caught between journeys. Either way, they hum with humanity. Outside, a fountain lies dry, but its tile work survives. Bright blue swirls of ceramic shimmer through dust, still defiant. You imagine a Sogdian child playing there, splashing through cold water under a desert sun. Her laughter long gone, but somehow still suspended in the breeze that stirs the palms. Here's your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found Sogdian dice, tiny carved bone cubes used for games and gambling. One set even had odd inscriptions, not numbers but directions: north, east, home, wait, turn back, and laugh. Was it a joke, a game, or some merchant's way of letting fate decide which caravan to follow? You like to think it was all three. But as you explore further, you see how nature has reclaimed its share. Sand drifts in corners like soft sighs. Ivy coils around broken walls. An entire caravanserai lies buried to its shoulders, its courtyard filled with silence instead of traders. It's hard not to feel reverent here, not because of grief, but because of the quiet nobility of fading. There's a kind of peace in it, like the long exhale after a full life. Historians still argue how much of the Sogdian fall was actual collapse and how much was quiet evolution. Some families converted to Islam and were absorbed into the rising cultures of Central Asia. Others intermarried, changed names, took new routes. Perhaps they didn't disappear so much as dissolve, melting like ink into a new page. The story didn't stop. It just got harder to read. You enter a small room with faded wall paintings, dancing figures, swirling vines, mythic creatures mid-flight. The faces are blurred, but the movement remains. It's all so familiar now. You've seen these same motifs in Chinese temples, Persian poetry, even modern textile designs. The Sogdians may have vanished from maps, but not from memory. They live on in fragments, in flourishes, in the curve of a dragon's tail on a piece of fabric in a bazaar you haven't visited yet. A traveler walks past you, humming a tune you swear you heard 2 cities ago. He doesn't stop. He doesn't need to. The route is still here, beneath your feet, beneath his boots. You follow its invisible thread, knowing it leads nowhere and everywhere. That's the thing about history. It hides in plain sight, especially when it's quiet. You sit beneath a crumbling arch as the sun sets. You can almost hear them. The storytellers spinning tales for tips, the cooks calling out spicy skewers, the camel handlers arguing over tethering spots, and then the silence returns, not empty this time, but full of ghosts that don't haunt. They wait. They remember. They listen. You lean back against stone still warm from the sun and close your eyes. If you stay long enough, you begin to feel it, the pulse of a city that still breathes, barely. It inhales memories. It exhales dreams. And honestly, if you've made it this far without getting just a little misty-eyed over an extinct trade culture, or imagining yourself sipping fermented mare's milk in a forgotten courtyard, congratulations. You're officially sturdier than a caravan mule with sand in its teeth. Rest now, surrounded by the echoes of a people who lived fully, faded gently, and left behind just enough to keep us wondering. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of immortality that matters. The road narrows now. You step into a twilight that feels both ancient and eternal, like you've walked not just across continents, but through the spine of time itself. The winds that once carried laughter, negotiation, and song have quieted to a whisper. There are no more caravan bells, no more saffron-scented courtyards or ink-stained contracts written in the glow of oil lamps. Just sand, stars, and silence. You reach the last outpost, a stone platform half swallowed by dune and dusk. It once marked a hub, a place where caravans branched toward India, Persia, and the heart of China. Now it holds only wind-etched stone and the vague sense that something important used to happen here. You place your hand on the cold surface. It vibrates, not with sound, but with memory. This is where it all frayed. The Sogdian world, which once stretched across deserts and mountains with invisible threads of trust, began to unravel not with a bang, but with many small fractures. New empires rose, and they had new priorities. Tax laws shifted, borders hardened. The trust-based networks that once linked Samarkand and Xi'an slowly dried up like seasonal streams. You pass an old milestone stone, almost entirely buried. It reads, to Bukhara, 187 Lai, a Roman numeral on the other side, proof of how far the Sogdians once reached, translating distances for both the east and west. Now, no one passes it. No one needs to. The Silk Road has rerouted. The world has new highways now, digital ones, lit with pixels instead of torchlight. And yet, their fingerprints linger. You enter one final chamber, likely a family tomb. The air is cool, still, faintly fragrant with old dust and dried fig. Paintings adorn the walls, a caravan snaking through hills, a family gathered around a meal, a lone figure holding a pen, mid-letter, eyes fixed forward. It's not sad, it's not grand, it's human, quiet, complete. Here's your last quirky tidbit. A modern researcher in Uzbekistan once uncovered a Sogdian journal tucked into a sealed clay jar. Its final page read simply, "All routes change. May ours be remembered." Just 7 words. 7 centuries ago. You pause there, letting them settle in your bones. Historians still argue whether the Sogdians truly fell at all, or whether their story is one of quiet transformation. They became Muslim traders, Turkic citizens, Chinese officials. They adapted, always, like water flowing into new vessels. Maybe that's the story we forget to tell, not of fall, but of fluidity. Outside, the stars begin to press closer. You recognize a few constellations now, Orion, the Bear, the Archer, the same guides the Sogdians used. You wonder if they felt the same smallness beneath these skies, the same fragile awe, the same comfort in their continuity. You stand for a moment longer, listening, not for a voice, not for wind, but for the feeling of something passing through you, something old and kind and stubborn. And honestly, if you've made it this far, across the silent ruins, through the desert dark, past forgotten gods and fading scripts, congratulations, you've just walked the entire length of a civilization's breath, and you carried it gently. You rise with the desert wind, stepping softly away from crumbled archways and faded frescoes, following the long path out of a city that no longer dreams. The sand shifts beneath your feet like memory, fickle, soft, never quite where it was before. And as the ruins fade behind you, the weight of something invisible settles in. Not sadness, not quite. Something else. Reverence. You've walked among the traces of kings without crowns, diplomats without thrones, poets with no libraries. The Sogdians, once the lifeblood of the Silk Road, now sleep beneath it, undisturbed. The world, it seems, has quietly forgotten them. You travel now with a caravan of silence. The camels are real only in your imagination, their bells long silent, their footprints erased by wind. But still, they walk beside you. Still, they carry stories. You pass a well, where once a merchant poured a libation to thank the gods. The gods are gone. The well is dry, but etched into its rim is one word, barely visible. Ashwan. A name? A prayer? A final note left by someone who knew the road was ending. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some forgotten corners of Central Asia, villagers still use phrases like Sogdian cleverness to describe a particularly cunning business deal, despite having no idea where the phrase comes from. It lingers like dust in a book's spine, language remembering what memory has dropped. And language is the only place left for most. The cities are buried, the routes remapped, the temples turned to sand and stone. But the Sogdian legacy hides in plain sight, woven into the identities of cultures that grew from their roots. Persian calligraphers still echo their patterns. Buddhist stories still carry Sogdian phrasing. Chinese murals still hum with their brushstroke style. They're everywhere, if you squint. Historians still argue whether the Sogdians were victims of empire, swallowed by time, or simply too adaptable for their own legacy to remain fixed. Maybe they were too good at blending in, too skilled at disappearing into new worlds. The ultimate middlemen, so perfectly positioned between East and West that history passed through them like smoke. And yet you pause. Because isn't that, in some strange way, a triumph? They weren't erased. They were absorbed, translated, transmitted. They didn't vanish. They became part of everything, like salt in dough, like dye in cloth, like stories told too often to trace the teller. Tonight, as you sit beside a fire of your own making, imagined or real, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you carry the tale, that you now know the name of a people who rode between empires not with flags, but with fabrics, not with swords, but with silks and stories, not with monuments, but with memory. And that matters. You look up, the stars wheel overhead, same as they always have, same as they did for the Sogdians whispering prayers to wind gods beneath this same sky. Maybe they're still whispering. Maybe you're the one meant to listen. And if you've made it this far without lighting a candle in honor of forgotten merchants or naming your next pet camel, Weshperkar the Wind Whisperer, congratulations. You're officially less sentimental than a Sogdian shrine keeper, but not by much. Now rest, wanderer. Let your breath slow. Let your heart settle into that soft rhythm of stories ending. The road is nearly done. The sand covers what came before. And yet, somehow, it also preserves. Sleep now, cradled in the gentle farewell of a people who once mapped the world, not with borders, but with trust, and who quietly let go when the road no longer carried their name. Now let's slow everything down. Let the wind settle. Let the dunes soften into silence. You're no longer walking. You're floating, weightless in a sky full of stories. The caravan has stopped for the night. The camels are quiet. The stars are sharp pinpricks above you, pulsing like distant heartbeats. You lie back in the sand, the warmth of the day still lingering beneath you, and you breathe. Deeper now. Inhale slowly. Hold it. Let go. The Sogdians are far behind you now, but somehow also beside you. A people who carried no swords but shaped empires, who built no palaces but connected continents. They moved in the quiet lanes of trade, in the long pauses of diplomacy, in the gentle hush of stories whispered over tea. They weren't loud, they weren't famous, but they mattered. And tonight, you remembered them. You remembered their laughter, their loss, their letters and love and lanterns swaying in the night. So let yourself drift now, like the sand they once walked across. Let your mind wander toward stillness, toward sleep. Let their forgotten language hum softly beneath your breath. Let the glow of their campfires flicker in your dreams. You've walked long tonight. You've listened well. Sleep, traveler. Sleep and carry the story.